In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like tides against cosmic shores, there exists a truth that few dare to acknowledge. Some moments are so profound, so devastating, that they can shatter the foundations of reality itself. The Draconian Empire had ruled for 10,000 years, their scaled hands controlling the fate of countless worlds with cold efficiency. They had witnessed the birth and death of stars, the extinction of species, the collapse of entire solar systems. Nothing moved them, nothing touched their ancient crystalline hearts. But on a small, insignificant planet called Earth, in a cramped hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair, something happened that would change everything. A 12-year-old girl named Sarah Chen lay dying from a disease that had no cure, no hope, no mercy. Her small hand clutched a worn stuffed rabbit while machines beeped their mechanical lullabies around her failing body. High above the planet's atmosphere, aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Zeth Kalar watched through quantum surveillance feeds with eyes like molten gold. He had been assigned to observe this world before its scheduled harvesting, cataloging its resources and population for the Empire's expansion. It was routine, clinical, just another dying world to be consumed. But as he watched this child fight for breath, as he saw her parents weep beside her bed, as he witnessed the pure, unfiltered anguish of a species facing its most fundamental enemy, death itself, something cracked within his ancient chest. For 36 minutes he watched her suffer. For 36 minutes he remained still, bound by protocol and 10 millennia of conditioning. Then she died, and in that moment, as her small chest ceased its struggling rhythm, as her parents' cries pierced the sterile air, as an entire planet mourned another lost soul, Supreme Commander Zeth Kalar of the Draconian Empire made a decision that would ignite a revolution across the stars. The dragon had finally learned what it meant to feel human. The quantum surveillance display flickered with ethereal blue light as Supreme Commander Zeth Kalar adjusted the viewing angle for the 1,000th time that cycle. His massive form, 7 feet of scaled perfection bred for conquest and dominion, hunched over the control console with an intensity that had his subordinates exchanging nervous glances behind him. The Draconian Empire's flagship, Eternal Dominion, hummed with the power of 1,000 suns, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant stars like a massive jewel suspended in the void. But all of that magnificent power meant nothing as he watched the small human child in the sterile white room far below. Sarah Chen, age 12. Diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 3 months prior. The medical files that his ship's systems had effortlessly extracted from Earth's primitive networks painted a grim picture. Terminal. Inoperable. Fatal within days, possibly hours. Just another brief flicker of organic life destined to be snuffed out by the cruel mathematics of cellular decay. Zeth Kalar had observed the deaths of billions. Entire civilizations had perished under his watch as the Empire expanded its reach across the galaxy. The crystalline hives of Vega Prime, with their beautiful song speech and cities of living light. The methane builders of the Outer Rim, whose architectural marvels defied the laws of physics. The aquatic councils of Hydro 7, whose wisdom had once been sought across 3 spiral arms. All gone, all consumed. All forgotten except in the dry historical records that few bothered to read. Death was simply another resource to be cataloged and processed. So why couldn't he look away from this dying child? The girl's parents sat on either side of her bed, their faces etched with the kind of raw despair that Zeth Kalar had seen countless times before. The male, David Chen, held his daughter's left hand while stroking her thin hair with trembling fingers. The female, Dr. Lisa Chen, pressed her face against her daughter's shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs that the surveillance equipment could detect even through the hospital's walls. "Status report," Zeth Kalar commanded without turning from the display, his voice carrying the authority of 10,000 years of unchallenged rule. Sub-Commander Velthar, a younger Draconian with scales the color of burnished copper, stepped forward and activated his data tablet. "All harvesting preparations are proceeding on schedule, Supreme Commander." The resource extraction platforms are positioned at optimal orbital points. The population centers have been mapped and cataloged. Estimated completion time for full planetary consumption. Resistance estimates negligible, sir. Their weapons technology is approximately 4,700 years behind our current defensive capabilities. Their most advanced nuclear devices would barely register against our hull plating. Total estimated casualties to our forces, 0. Zeth Caller's golden eyes never left the screen. On it, Sarah Chen stirred slightly, her face contorting with pain as another wave of agony coursed through her deteriorating body. Her mother immediately reached for the call button, summoning a human medical technician who would inject more chemicals into the girl's bloodstream. Chemicals that would dull the pain but could not stop the inevitable march toward death. "Their medical technology," Zeth Caller said quietly. "Status?" Velthar consulted his tablet again, confusion evident in his scaled features. This was not part of the standard pre-harvesting briefing. "Primitive, sir. Carbon-based chemical treatments, crude radiation therapy, surgical interventions that have a 30% failure rate. They have identified the cellular mechanisms causing the child's condition, but lack the technological sophistication to address it at the quantum level. Could our medical systems treat her condition?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Every Draconian on the bridge turned to stare at their supreme commander, their expressions ranging from confusion to something approaching horror. In 10,000 years of expansion, this question had never been asked, never even considered. Velthar's voice was carefully neutral. "Sir, our bioreconstruction matrices could reverse the cellular damage within hours. The quantum tissue regenerators could rebuild her immune system from the molecular level. Our nanomedical systems could eliminate the diseased cells and repair the damage without any trace of the original condition." "I see." Zeth Caller fell silent, his massive form perfectly still except for the slow rhythmic movement of his breathing. On the screen, a human medical professional entered Sarah's room carrying a small cup of water and what appeared to be oral medication. The girl tried to sit up to take the medicine but was too weak, so her father gently supported her while her mother held the cup to her lips. Such tenderness, such desperate, futile care lavished on a creature that would be dead within days regardless of their efforts. The draconian military doctrine was clear and had never been challenged. Observe, catalog, harvest, move on. Emotional attachment to indigenous life forms was not just discouraged, it was literally bred out of their species through careful genetic manipulation spanning hundreds of generations. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, the ultimate expression of evolutionary perfection. They took what they needed and left nothing behind but carefully sanitized space. So why did watching this child suffer feel like acid burning through his chest plates? "Sir," Velthar ventured carefully, "the harvesting schedule requires your authorization to proceed to Phase 2. The atmospheric processors are standing by." Zeth Caller continued staring at the screen. Sarah had managed to take her medication and was now lying back against her pillows, her breathing labored but steady. Her mother was reading to her from a small book, something about a rabbit and a garden. The girl's eyes were closed, but she was smiling slightly, finding comfort in her mother's voice despite the pain that racked her small body. "Tell me about human emotional attachments," Zeth Caller said suddenly. "Sir, their bonding mechanisms, their family structures. Explain them." Velthar activated his tablet again, clearly uncomfortable with this line of inquiry. "Human emotional bonds are intense, sir. Unlike our species' practical reproductive and social arrangements, humans form deep psychological connections that can persist even after the bonded individual's death. Parents in particular will sacrifice their own survival for their offspring. It appears to be a significant evolutionary weakness that limits their logical decision-making capabilities. A weakness. Their emotional responses override rational thought processes. They will expend enormous resources on hopeless causes, fight unwinnable battles, and endure tremendous suffering rather than accept logical outcomes. It makes them unpredictable in some tactical situations, but ultimately it's a fatal flaw that has prevented them from achieving any significant technological or social advancement. Zeth Kalar watched David Chen lean down to kiss his daughter's forehead, whispering something that made her smile despite her obvious pain. The tenderness of the gesture, the pure love evident in every movement, struck him with an unexpected force. "Has any Draconian ever experienced such attachment?" he asked. The question sent a ripple of unease through the bridge crew. Velthar's copper scales darkened with anxiety. "Sir, our genetic modifications eliminated such inefficient emotional responses over 6,000 years ago. The Empire requires clear thinking and logical decision-making from its commanders. Emotional attachment leads to compromised judgment and tactical errors." "I see." But Zeth Kalar wasn't sure he did see. Not anymore. For 200 years, he had served the Empire with perfect efficiency. He had commanded the harvesting of 47 worlds, processed the resources of 63 civilizations, and overseen the expansion of Draconian territory across 12 star systems. His record was flawless. His loyalty was absolute. His emotional responses were properly regulated and controlled. So what was this growing ache in his chest as he watched Sarah Chen fight for each breath? On the screen, the girl's vital signs flickered weakly on the medical monitors surrounding her bed. Her heart rate was erratic, her blood oxygen levels dropping despite the mechanical assistance breathing apparatus that had been attached to her face. The human medical professionals moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting medicines and monitoring equipment, but Zeth Kalar's enhanced analytical systems could read the futility in their movements. They were going through the motions of care while knowing that nothing they did would make any difference. "Time until planetary harvesting commences?" he asked. 6 standard hours, sir, pending your authorization." 6 hours. In 6 hours, the atmospheric processors would begin converting Earth's atmosphere into the methane-rich mixture that Draconian ships required for fuel production. The process would take approximately 18 hours to complete, during which time all carbon-based life on the planet would suffocate and die. It was efficient, clean, and left the planet's mineral resources completely intact for extraction. Sarah Chen would die of her disease in perhaps 4 hours, according to his medical analysis systems. She would never even see the sky change color as her world's atmosphere was transformed into fuel for ships that would carry her planet's resources to distant Draconian colonies. "Sir?" Velthar's voice carried a note of concern. "The harvesting authorization." Zeth Kalar's hand moved toward the authorization console, then stopped. On the screen, Sarah was trying to speak to her parents, her voice so weak that the surveillance systems had to amplify the audio just to make it audible. "Mommy," she whispered, "are you scared?" Lisa Chen looked up from her book, tears streaming down her face, but managed to smile at her daughter. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's not scared, are you?" "A little," Sarah admitted. "But you and Daddy are here, so it's okay." The simple trust in those words, the absolute faith that her parents' presence could somehow make even death bearable, hit Zeth Kalar like a physical blow. His massive hand clenched involuntarily, leaving deep gouges in the metal console. "Sir, are you unwell?" Velthar stepped forward, his tactical training overriding his deference to rank. If the Supreme Commander was experiencing some kind of medical emergency, it could compromise the entire mission. Zeth Kalar stared at his hand, at the damage he had unconsciously inflicted on the reinforced metal. In 200 years of military service, his emotional control had never faltered, never wavered, never shown even the slightest crack. "I am?" he began, then stopped. What was he? What was this sensation building in his chest like molten metal? What were these thoughts that kept cycling through his mind, imagining scenarios where he took his ship down to that planet and used their medical technology to save one small human child? It was illogical, irrational, completely contrary to everything he had been bred and trained to be. It was also the strongest compulsion he had ever experienced. "Sir, with respect, I must note that you appear to be experiencing some form of emotional dysregulation," Velthar said carefully. "Perhaps you should submit to medical evaluation before making critical command decisions." The suggestion was logical, reasonable, exactly what Draconian military protocol demanded in such situations. But it also meant that someone else would authorize the harvesting of Earth. Someone else would watch Sarah Chen die while her planet was consumed around her. Someone else would make the decision to let this beautiful, heartbreaking display of human love and loss become just another entry in the Empire's resource acquisition logs. "No," Zeth Kalar said quietly. "Sir?" I said no. He turned from the display for the first time in hours, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that made his subordinates step back involuntarily. "I will not submit to medical evaluation. I will not transfer command authority. And I will not authorize the harvesting of this planet." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the bridge. Somewhere in the background, the ship's systems continued their gentle humming, and the quantum surveillance feed continued transmitting images of Sarah Chen's labored breathing. But every Draconian on the bridge had gone perfectly still, as if those words had somehow frozen them in place. "Sir," Velthar said slowly, "I'm not sure I understand. The harvesting quota for this sector requires the resources from this planet. The Empire is expecting... The Empire will have to adjust its expectations." Zethkalar turned back to the display where Syrah's parents were now holding her hands as her breathing became increasingly irregular. The medical monitor showed vital signs that were failing rapidly, and human medical personnel were moving with increased urgency around her bed. She was dying. In minutes, possibly less, this brave little human would take her last breath. Her parents would lose the most precious thing in their universe. An entire planet would continue its rotation around its star, oblivious to the fact that one of its most beautiful souls had just departed. Unless someone with the power to save her chose to act. "Sub-Commander Velthar," Zethkalar said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the unprecedented nature of his orders. "Plot a course for the planet's surface. Medical Bay Alpha is to prepare for immediate bio-reconstruction procedures. Keth Moreau standing by with full quantum tissue regeneration capability." "Sir, I cannot comply with that order." Zethkalar turned slowly, his massive form radiating the kind of controlled menace that had made him legendary throughout the Empire. "You cannot comply? Sir, you are clearly experiencing some form of psychological crisis. Making contact with indigenous populations is strictly forbidden except in cases of military necessity. Using Imperial medical resources on non-Draconian species is..." Velthar swallowed hard, his copper scales pale with anxiety. "Sir, it's treason." The word hung between them like a weapon. Treason. In 10,000 years of Imperial expansion, the charge had been leveled fewer than a dozen times. Those found guilty had been subjected to neural dissolution, their consciousness scattered across quantum space to experience eternal, isolated agony. But as Zethkalar watched Sarah Chen take what might be her final breath, he found that the threat of personal consequences had lost all meaning. "Then I commit treason," he said quietly. "Navigation, plot that course. Medical, prepare for incoming patient. Communications, open a channel to the planet's surface." For a moment, nobody moved. The bridge crew looked from their supreme commander to their sub-commander and back again, caught between conflicting loyalties and unprecedented orders. Then, slowly, the navigation officer's hands moved over his console. "Course plotted, sir. Medical Bay Alpha standing by. Communications channel open." Velthar stepped forward, his hand moving toward his sidearm. "Sir, as your second in command, I cannot allow you to compromise this mission or endanger this crew through emotional instability. I am relieving you of command under Military Code 77 Alpha." Zethkalar smiled, an expression that was somehow more terrifying than any display of anger could have been. "You are welcome to try, Sub-Commander. But I should mention that I have already transmitted new authorization codes to all critical systems. This ship responds to my voice alone until I choose otherwise." "You can't do this," Velthar said, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew that a supreme commander had virtually unlimited authority over his vessel and crew. The Empire will adapt," Zethkalar cut him off. "As it always has. As it always must." He turned to the communications console. Open transmission to the medical facility below. Full audio and visual. The main display flickered, and suddenly the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was filled with the sounds of Sarah Chen's hospital room. The beeping of monitors, the quiet sobbing of her parents, the hushed conversations of medical personnel who had run out of options. "Dr. Lisa Chen," Zeth Collar said, his voice carrying clearly through the hospital's communication systems. The reaction was immediate and electric. Sarah's mother jerked upright, looking around wildly for the source of the voice. Her husband grabbed her hand protectively, while medical alarms began sounding as equipment registered the unauthorized communication signal. Who is this?" Dr. Chen managed to say. "My name is Zeth Collar. I am currently in orbit above your planet. I have been watching your daughter, and I believe I can save her life." The words created chaos in the hospital room. Medical personnel rushed in, security guards appeared, and someone was shouting about unauthorized access to their communications grid. But through it all, Sarah's parents stared at the ceiling as if they could see through it to the stars beyond. "That's impossible," Dr. Chen whispered. "Sarah has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The disease has progressed beyond any treatment options." "We've tried everything that your technology allows," Zeth Collar corrected gently. "But there are other possibilities, other technologies, other hope." On the bed between them, Sarah Chen opened her eyes and looked directly at the communication speaker. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly through the connection. "Are you an angel?" The question struck Zeth Collar like lightning through his ancient heart. An angel. This dying child, in her innocence and pain, had asked if he was an angel. The irony was almost overwhelming. He who had overseen the extinction of entire civilizations being mistaken for a being of mercy and salvation. "No, little one," he said softly, his voice carrying a gentleness that made his bridge crew stare in amazement. "I am not an angel. I am something far different. But I am someone who wants very much to help you." In the hospital room below, chaos continued to swirl around Sarah's bed. Security guards were trying to locate the source of the transmission while doctors debated whether this was some kind of elaborate hoax. Dr. Chen clung to her husband's hand, torn between hope and the crushing weight of medical reality. "This is impossible," she repeated, but her voice carried less certainty now. "Even if someone were in orbit, even if they had better medical technology than ours, Sarah is dying right now. She has minutes, maybe less." As if summoned by her words, the medical monitors around Sarah's bed began emitting urgent warnings. Her heart rate was becoming increasingly erratic, and her oxygen saturation levels were dropping despite the breathing apparatus. The attending physician moved quickly to her bedside, checking her pulse and pupil response with practiced urgency. "Her systems are shutting down," the doctor announced grimly. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing more we can do. You should say your goodbyes." Dr. Chen collapsed into her chair, overcome by grief, while David Chen leaned down to whisper into his daughter's ear. Around them, medical personnel began the quiet, respectful dance of preparing for death, adjusting equipment, dimming lights, creating space for a family's final moments together. But high above the planet, Zeth Collar was already in motion. "Teleportation Bay, prepare for immediate medical extraction," he commanded, striding across the bridge toward the lift that would take him to the ship's medical facilities. "Dr. Keth Moros, I want full bioreconstruction capabilities ready in 60 seconds. "Sir," Velthar called after him, "you cannot seriously intend to violate Imperial quarantine protocols for a single indigenous life form. The consequences are mine to bear," Zeth Collar replied without stopping. "And I have made my choice." The lift carried him swiftly through the massive ship's corridors, past crew members who pressed themselves against the walls as he passed. Word of what was happening had spread quickly through the ship's communication networks, and every Draconian aboard was struggling to process the implications. Their supreme commander, a being whose emotional responses had been carefully engineered out of existence, was risking everything to save one human child. Dr. Keth Moros was waiting in Medical Bay Alpha when Zeth Collar arrived, her silver scales gleaming under the bright surgical lights. She had served as the ship's chief medical officer for over a century, and her skills with bioreconstruction technology were legendary even among the Draconians. But her expression was troubled as she watched her commander enter the sterile chamber. "Sir, I have prepared the quantum tissue regenerators as requested, but I must voice my concerns about this course of action. Using our medical technology on alien physiology carries significant risks. We have no data on human cellular compatibility with our regeneration matrices." "Then we will gather that data," Zethkala replied, moving to the teleportation console. "Lock on to the human child's biosignature. Transport her directly to Surgical Bay 2. Sir, removing her from her natural environment at this stage of cellular collapse could kill her instantly." "The shock alone," Dr. Zethkala interrupted, his golden eyes blazing with determination. "That child is going to die in the next few minutes, regardless of what we do. The only question is whether we try to save her or whether we let her slip away while we debate the risks." Dr. Kethmoros stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Her hands moved over the teleportation controls with practiced precision, locking onto Sarah's biosignature through the quantum surveillance network. "Transport initiating in 10 seconds. Sir, if this fails, then we will have tried," Zethkala said simply. "That will have to be enough." The teleportation beam activated with a soft hum of displaced energy. For a moment, the surgical bay was filled with swirling light and quantum distortion. Then the light faded and a small human form materialized on the medical table. Sarah Chen looked impossibly fragile, surrounded by the massive draconian medical equipment. Her breathing was barely perceptible, and her skin had taken on the pale, waxy appearance that preceded death. The medical monitors that materialized with her screened warnings about failing vital signs and imminent cardiac arrest. But she was alive. For now, Dr. Kethmoros moved with fluid efficiency, her scaled hands dancing over control surfaces as she activated the ship's most advanced medical systems. Quantum scanners mapped every cell in Sarah's body, creating a complete molecular blueprint of her condition. Bioreconstruction matrices analyzed the leukemic cells and began calculating optimal treatment protocols.
"Dr. Subsetcher is more complex than I anticipated. Dr.
Kethmoros murmured, studying the readouts. "The disease has progressed extensively, but the fundamental architecture is still intact. The quantum regenerators should be able to identify and eliminate the malignant cells while rebuilding her immune system from scratch." "How long?" Zethkala asked, watching Sarah's face as the medical equipment worked around her small form. "For complete cellular regeneration? 6 hours minimum. But sir, I must warn you, the process is extraordinarily painful for conscious subjects. Our pain management systems are calibrated for draconian physiology. For a human child," Zethkala looked down at Sarah's peaceful face, imagining the agony she would experience as her cells were systematically destroyed and rebuilt. "Can you keep her unconscious during the procedure?" "Yes, but that carries its own risks. Her brain chemistry is completely alien to our medical knowledge. Too much sedation could cause permanent neurological damage or death." The Supreme Commander was quiet for a long moment, weighing the terrible mathematics of choice. Let her die peacefully in her parents' arms, or subject her to hours of potentially unbearable pain in the hope of saving her life. It should have been a simple calculation, the needs of one individual against the protocols of an empire. But looking at this brave little girl who had asked if he was an angel, Zethkala found that mathematics had become meaningless. "Begin the procedure," he said quietly, "and doctor, be as gentle as you can." Dr. Kethmoros nodded and activated the bioreconstruction matrix. Immediately, Sarah's body was surrounded by a soft blue glow as millions of nanomedical devices began their work. They flowed through her bloodstream like liquid light, identifying cancerous cells and beginning the delicate process of cellular repair. Meanwhile, in the hospital room far below, Sarah's sudden disappearance had created pandemonium. Security guards were questioning every staff member while doctors stared at the empty bed where their patient had been lying just moments before. Dr. Chen was alternating between hysteria and desperate hope. demanding answers that no one could provide. "Please," she called out to the empty air, addressing the mysterious voice that had spoken to them. "Please tell me she's safe. Tell me she's alive." Zeth Kalaro activated the communication channel again, his voice carrying clearly into the chaos of the hospital room. "Your daughter is aboard my ship, Dr. Chen. My medical team is working to save her life." "Aboard your ship?" David Chen stepped forward, his face a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "What kind of ship? Who are you people?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zeth Kalar could have lied, could have created some comfortable fiction about advanced human technology or benevolent aliens, but looking at Sarah's unconscious form surrounded by draconian medical equipment, he found that deception had become impossible. "I am Supreme Commander Zeth Kalar of the Draconian Empire," he said simply. "My people have been observing your world as part of our expansion protocols. We are not what you would consider friendly visitors." The words created a shocked silence in the hospital room. Even the security guards stopped their frantic searching to stare at the communication speaker. Doc Chen's face went pale as the implications sank in. "You're invaders," she whispered. "You're here to conquer Earth." "We were," Zeth Kalar admitted. "The harvesting of your planet was scheduled to begin in 4 hours. Your civilization was to be processed, your resources extracted, your world prepared for draconian colonization." Was? David Chen seized on the past tense like a lifeline. "Your daughter changed that," Zeth Kalar said softly. "Watching her courage, her love for you, your love for her, it showed me something that I had forgotten was possible, something that my people eliminated from themselves thousands of years ago." On the medical table, Sarah stirred slightly as the nano-medical devices continued their work. Her vital signs were stabilizing, and the quantum scanners showed that the cancerous cells were being systematically eliminated from her bloodstream. But her face was contorted with pain even in unconsciousness, and soft whimpers escaped her lips. Dr. Kethmoros looked up from her monitors, concern evident in her silver features. "Sir, her pain responses are off our measurement scales. The cellular reconstruction is causing massive neural stimulation. I'm not sure how much more her system can handle." Zeth Kalar moved closer to the table, his massive form dwarfing the small human child. Without conscious thought, he reached out with one scaled finger and gently touched her forehead. The contact sent an unexpected shock through his nervous system. Not painful, but startling in its intensity. "Can you hear me, little one?" he whispered. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. When she saw his face, golden eyes in a scaled visage that spoke of ancient power and alien intelligence, she should have been terrified. Instead, she smiled weakly. "You came," she said, her voice barely audible. "You really came." "I promised I would help you," Zeth Kalar replied, his throat tight with unfamiliar emotion. "But you must be very brave now. The medicine I am giving you hurts, but it will make you well." "I know," Sarah whispered. "Mommy always says that medicine tastes bad because it's working hard to help us feel better." The simple wisdom of those words hit Zeth Kalar like a revelation. This child, this small human facing pain and death with courage beyond her years, understood something fundamental that his entire civilization had forgotten. That suffering could have meaning. That love could make even agony bearable. That hope could exist even in the darkest moments. "Tell me about your family," he said gently, keeping his finger pressed against her forehead. Somehow the contact seemed to calm her, reducing her pain responses according to the medical monitors. Sarah's eyes brightened despite her ordeal. "Mommy's a doctor, like you. She helps sick people get better. And Daddy builds houses for families to live in. They love me so much even when I'm sick and can't play or go to school." "They must be very worried about you right now." "Yeah," Sarah admitted, "but I told them not to be scared." "You're going to fix me, right? You're going to make me all better so I can go home?" The trust in her voice, the absolute faith that this alien being who had taken her from everything she knew would somehow make everything right was more humbling than any defeat Zeth Kalar had ever experienced in battle. This child had placed her life, her future, her very existence in his hands without question or doubt.
Yes, little one, he promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being.
I am going to make you all better, but you must hold on. You must be strong just a little longer. Zara nodded, her small hand reaching up to grasp his finger. Her touch was warm and surprisingly strong, and Zeth-Kalar felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking but opening, like ice melting in spring sunlight. Dr. Kefmoros continued monitoring the bioreconstruction process, her expression growing more hopeful as the hours passed. The quantum regenerators were working beyond all expectations, not only eliminating the cancerous cells but actually improving Sarah's overall cellular structure. Her immune system was being rebuilt to specifications that would make her virtually immune to most diseases, and her bone marrow was producing healthy blood cells at an accelerated rate. "Sir," she reported quietly, "the procedure is succeeding beyond our most optimistic projections. Her cellular regeneration rate is remarkable. I believe she will not only survive but will be healthier than she has ever been." But even as the medical procedure progressed successfully, Zeth-Kalar was acutely aware that other consequences were building around them. His communication with Earth had been detected by multiple government agencies, and military installations across the planet were mobilizing in response to the confirmed presence of alien technology. More immediately, his own crew was growing increasingly restless with his unprecedented actions. The bridge communication system crackled to life, and Velthar's voice filled the medical bay. "Sir, I am receiving urgent communications from Imperial Command. They are demanding an immediate status report on the harvesting operation. What should I tell them?" Zeth-Kalar looked down at Sarah, who was sleeping more peacefully now as the worst of the cellular reconstruction process completed. Her color was returning and her breathing had stabilized. In a few more hours, she would be completely cured, not just of her cancer, but enhanced beyond normal human capabilities. "Tell them," he said quietly, "that the harvesting operation has been canceled. Tell them that Supreme Commander Zeth-Kalar has found something more valuable than the resources of an entire planet." The silence that followed stretched for several heartbeats. Then Velthar's voice returned, strained with barely controlled panic. "Sir, I cannot transmit that message. Imperial Command will order our immediate return for court-martial proceedings. The entire crew will be charged with treason." "Then perhaps," Zeth-Kalar said, his voice carrying a note of grim determination, "it is time for the Draconian Empire to learn what this small human child has taught me. That some things are worth any sacrifice, that love is stronger than protocol, that mercy can be more powerful than conquest." He looked up at Dr. Jertine Kefmoros, who was watching him with something approaching awe. "Doctor, how much longer until the procedure is complete?" "But sir, what you are suggesting, if you openly defy Imperial Command, then I will face the consequences," Zeth-Kalar replied. "Just as countless beings have faced the consequences of Imperial expansion. The only difference is that this time, the choice is mine." Sarah stirred in her sleep, her hand still grasping his finger. In her dreams, she was probably thinking of home, of her parents, of a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. She had no idea that her survival had triggered a chain of events that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. But Zeth-Kalar knew, and as he watched this brave little human child fight her way back from the edge of death, he began to plan not just her salvation, but the salvation of her entire species. The dragon had learned to love. Now it was time to teach the Empire what that love could accomplish. The Imperial fleet dropped out of hyperspace with the precision that had made the Draconian Empire the undisputed master of the galaxy for 10 millennia. 12 massive warships arranged themselves in perfect formation around Earth, their crystalline hulls gleaming like deadly jewels against the star-filled void. Each vessel carried enough firepower to reduce a planet to molten slag within hours, and together they represented the Empire's ultimate expression of overwhelming force. But aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Zeth-Kalar barely glanced at the tactical displays showing the arrival of the Imperial Response Fleet. His attention remained fixed on the small human child sleeping peacefully in the medical bay. her cellular reconstruction now complete and her vital signs stronger than they had ever been. Sarah Chen had been transformed. The quantum regenerators had not only eliminated every trace of leukemia from her system, but had optimized her entire biological structure. Her immune system now operated at efficiency levels that would make her virtually immune to disease. Her bone density had been increased to 3 times human normal, and her neural pathways had been enhanced to allow processing speeds that would classify her as a genius by human standards. But more than that, she was alive. She was healthy. She would have a future. And that future had cost Zefkalar everything he had been. "Sir," Dr. Kethmoros said quietly as she made final adjustments to the medical equipment surrounding Sarah's bed, "the child's transformation is complete. Her cellular structure has stabilized at optimal parameters. She could be returned to her family now." Zefkalar nodded but didn't move from his position beside the medical table. His scaled hand rested gently on Sarah's forehead, a gesture that had become natural over the past several hours. The physical contact seemed to calm both of them, creating a connection that transcended species barriers. "Doctor," he said after a long moment, "in all your years of medical practice, have you ever seen cellular reconstruction produce results like this?" Kethmoros studied her readouts carefully before responding. "No, sir. The optimization levels we achieved should have been impossible given the baseline human physiology. It's almost as if her cellular structure was eager to accept our enhancements, as if it was designed to integrate with our technology." Before Zefkalar could respond to this intriguing observation, the medical bay's communication system activated with an urgent chime. Sub-Commander Velthar's voice filled the chamber, tight with barely controlled fear. "Sir, Imperial Grand Admiral Thexanar is requesting immediate communication. He is not pleased with our status reports." Zefkalar sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of ages. Grand Admiral Thexnarl commanded the Empire's northern expansion fleets and was known throughout Draconian space for his ruthless efficiency and complete intolerance of deviation from Imperial protocol. If he had been dispatched to deal with this situation personally, it meant that Imperial Command viewed Zefkalar's actions as a threat to the fundamental order of their civilization. "Put him through," Zefkalar said, not bothering to move from Sarah's bedside. The main display screen activated, revealing the intimidating form of Grand Admiral Thexnalar. His scales were deep black with silver markings that denoted his exalted rank, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of absolute authority. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship, Quantum Dominance, bustled with activity as his crew prepared for whatever action he deemed necessary. "Supreme Commander Zefkalar." Thexanalar's voice was like winter winds across a dead world. "You will explain to me why a routine harvesting operation has become a galactic incident requiring the deployment of a full Imperial response fleet. The situation has evolved beyond standard operational parameters. I have determined that harvesting this world would not be in the Empire's best interests." Thexnalar's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have determined? Commander, you seem to have forgotten that harvest quotas are set by Imperial Command, not by individual field commanders. This sector requires the resources from that planet to maintain our expansion schedule. Then Imperial Command will have to adjust its schedule." The words created a deadly silence on both ends of the communication link. Dr. Kethmoros instinctively stepped back from the display, recognizing the signs of impending violence that every Draconian learned to read in childhood. But Zefkalar remained perfectly calm, his hand still resting protectively on Sarah's forehead. "Commander," Thexanalar said slowly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "are you experiencing some form of mental breakdown? Because that is the only explanation I can conceive for what sounds remarkably like open rebellion against Imperial authority. I am experiencing something that I believe our people have forgotten exists," Zefkalar replied. "I am experiencing choice free will. The ability to place moral considerations above tactical advantages." "Moral considerations?" Thexnalar's voice rose with incredulity. "Commander, you are talking like one of the inferior species we conquer." Morality is a luxury that apex predators cannot afford. We take what we need because we have the strength to take it. That is the natural order of the universe. Responding to the raised voices, even in her unconscious state, Zethkalar automatically adjusted his position to shield her more completely from the display screen, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the Grand Admiral. "You have formed an emotional attachment to one of the indigenous life forms," Thexanalar said with dawning understanding. "Commander, this is worse than I thought. You are not just defying orders, you are exhibiting behavior that was bred out of our species centuries ago. Perhaps it is time to breed it back in." The statement hit the communication channel like a physical explosion. On his bridge, Thexanalar's crew turned to stare at their displays in shock, unable to process what they had just heard. The genetic modifications that had eliminated emotional attachment from draconian psychology were considered one of their species' greatest achievements, the foundation upon which their galactic empire had been built. "Commander Zethkalar," Thexanalar said with deadly calm, "you are hereby relieved of command and ordered to surrender yourself for immediate transport to Imperial Command for psychological evaluation and court-martial. Your crew will implement the harvesting protocols under my direct supervision." "I respectfully decline." "You cannot decline a direct order from a Grand Admiral." "I can," Zethkalar said simply, "and I do. This child has shown me something that I had never seen before, Grand Admiral. She has shown me what we lost when we chose conquest over compassion, what we sacrificed when we decided that strength meant the absence of love." Sarah's eyes fluttered open, drawn to wakefulness by the tension in the voices around her. She looked up at Zethkalar with the perfect trust that only children can possess, then noticed the angry face on the display screen. "Who's the scary man?" she asked with characteristic directness. Thexanalar's expression shifted from fury to something approaching horror as he realized he was looking at one of the indigenous life forms that should have been exterminated hours ago. That creature is the cause of this insanity." "Commander, what have you done to yourself?" "I have remembered what it means to protect something precious," Zethkalar replied, his voice gentle as he addressed Sarah. "This is Grand Admiral Thexanalar, little one. He is a very important leader among my people. With the frank curiosity of youth, he looks angry. Are you in trouble?" "Perhaps," Zethkalar admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting the consequences of making difficult choices." Something about the interaction between the massive draconian commander and the small human child was profoundly disturbing to his carefully ordered worldview. There was a gentleness in Zethkalar's demeanor that should have been impossible, a protective tenderness that violated everything he understood about their species. "Commander," he said, forcing his voice back to official tones, "you have 60 seconds to transport that creature back to the planet's surface and assume surrender position for transport to my vessel. If you do not comply, I will consider your ship to be an active rebellion and respond accordingly. And if I refuse, then I will destroy your vessel and implement harvesting protocols immediately. The loss of one compromised ship is acceptable collateral damage." The threat hung in the air like a sword. Sarah looked between the two adult faces, her enhanced intelligence already beginning to process the implications of what she was hearing. "Are they going to hurt you because you helped me?" she asked quietly. Zethkalar met her eyes, seeing in them a wisdom that transcended her physical age. "They believe that helping you was wrong, little one. They believe that strength means taking what you want, regardless of who gets hurt. But that's not what strength means," Sarah said with the simple certainty of a child who had faced death and chosen courage. "Strength means protecting people who can't protect themselves. Strength means doing what's right even when it's hard." Her words echoed through both bridge chambers with unexpected power. Several of Thexanalar's crew members exchanged glances, their expressions troubled. Even some of Zethkalar's subordinates, who had been prepared to support their commander's rebellion out of loyalty rather than understanding, began to look at the situation with new eyes. 30 seconds, Commander," Thexanalar warned, but his voice lacked some of its earlier certainty. Zefkalar looked down at Sarah, then at Dr. Kethmoros, then at his own hands, hands that had signed the death warrants of civilizations, hands that had now saved the life of one small human child. The choice before him was clear: surrender and watch Sarah's world burn, or fight and likely die in the attempt to protect it. But as he considered the options, he realized that the mathematics of the situation had changed. This was no longer about one world or one species. Sarah's transformation had proven that humans could integrate with draconian technology in ways that should have been impossible. Her courage had awakened something in his own psychology that the Empire had spent millennia trying to eliminate. Her simple definition of strength had exposed the fundamental weakness at the heart of their galactic dominion. "Grand Admiral," he said, his voice carrying a new note of authority, "I have a counter-proposal. Instead of destroying this world, why don't we try something that the Empire has never attempted before? And what would that be? Cooperation instead of conquest, partnership instead of predation, building something together instead of taking everything apart." Vexnaller's laugh was bitter and cold. "Commander, you sound like an idealistic fool. The galaxy is a harsh place where only the strong survive. Cooperation is what weak species attempt when they cannot achieve dominance through strength." "Is it?" Zefkalar gestured to the medical equipment surrounding Sarah. "This child's cellular integration with our technology exceeded every projection our medical systems made. Her recovery rate was unprecedented. Her biological optimization achieved levels that we have never seen before. What if cooperation doesn't make us weak, Grand Admiral? What if it makes us stronger?" The question seemed to give Thexanalar pause. Despite his ideological commitment to Imperial doctrine, he was also a practical military commander who recognized tactical advantages when he saw them. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we have an opportunity to evolve beyond simple predation. That instead of harvesting this world's resources and moving on, we establish it as the first Imperial Protectorate. That we learn from these humans just as they could learn from us." Sarah sat up in her medical bed, her enhanced physiology making movement easy despite her recent ordeal. "You want to be friends with us instead of hurting us? I want to try something that my people have never tried before. I want to see what happens when dragons learn to be guardians instead of destroyers." The communication channel fell silent as Thexanalar considered this unprecedented proposal. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders that would determine not just the fate of one planet, but potentially the direction of their entire civilization. Finally, the Grand Admiral spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Commander Zefkalar, what you are proposing would require fundamental changes to Imperial policy. It would need to be approved at the highest levels of command. Then perhaps it's time for those discussions to begin. And if Imperial Command rejects this proposal..." Zefkalar looked down at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with bright, intelligent eyes. In her face, he saw not just the future of one small human, but the potential future of two species learning to reach beyond their limitations. "Then we will have to decide whether we serve the Empire," he said quietly, "or whether the Empire should serve the greater good of all sentient life." The words constituted the most profound challenge to Imperial authority in 10,000 years. But as they echoed through the communication channels, something unexpected happened. Instead of immediate rejection, they sparked the first real conversation about purpose and meaning that the Draconian Empire had experienced in millennia. And at the center of it all, one small human girl sat quietly in her medical bed, living proof that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the courage to show mercy. The Imperial Council Chamber was a monument to 10,000 years of unquestioned dominance. Carved from a single massive crystal that had once been the heart of a dying star, it rose from the surface of the Empire's capital world like a frozen flame reaching toward the heavens. Within its translucent walls, the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of civilizations, with the casual indifference of gods discussing the weather. But today, for the first time in living memory, the council was in chaos. Emperor Methkalar, ancient beyond measure and more machine than living being after countless centuries of life-extending procedures, sat upon the crystal throne and watched his carefully ordered universe unravel before his golden eyes. The reports streaming in from the Outer Rim territories painted a picture that should have been impossible. Rebellion was spreading like wildfire through the Imperial fleet. It had started with the transmission from Earth broadcast on all Imperial communication frequencies by Supreme Commander Zeth Kalar. The message had been simple, direct, and absolutely devastating to Imperial morale. I am Supreme Commander Zeth Kalar of the Draconian First Expansion Fleet. The transmission had begun, his voice carrying to every corner of the Empire. I am Supreme Commander. For 200 years, I have served the Empire with absolute loyalty, believing that our strength gave us the right to take whatever we desired from lesser species. But today, I have learned that true strength comes not from taking, but from protecting. Not from conquering, but from nurturing. The transmission had included full biomedical scans of Sarah Chin, showing her remarkable integration with draconian enhancement technology. It had displayed her cellular optimization levels, her enhanced neural pathways, her improved immune responses, but more than that, it had shown her face, the face of a child who had been saved rather than sacrificed, protected rather than processed. This human child has taught me that mercy is not weakness, Zeth Kalar's voice had continued. Compassion is not inefficiency. Love is not a flaw to be eliminated from our genetic code. It is the foundation upon which true civilization must be built. Within hours of the transmission, reports had begun flooding in from across the Empire, ships refusing harvesting orders, commanders questioning the necessity of exterminating primitive species, entire fleets requesting reassignment to exploration rather than conquest missions. The genetic modifications that had eliminated emotional attachment from draconian psychology were beginning to break down, triggered by exposure to concepts that had been suppressed for millennia. Now, as Emperor Methkalar surveyed his council, he saw fear in the eyes of beings who had not experienced that emotion for thousands of years. The situation is unprecedented, Grand Admiral Thexnaller reported, his usually confident demeanor shaken by recent events. 17 ships have refused direct orders in the past cycle alone. Fleet morale is at critical levels. Some commanders are requesting permission to negotiate with indigenous populations rather than implement harvesting protocols. How many ships remain loyal? The Emperor asked, his voice carrying the weight of ages. Approximately 60% of our forces continue to follow standard operational procedures, Thexnaller replied, but that percentage is declining with each cycle. The rebellion is spreading through our communication networks like some kind of psychological virus. Emperor Methkalar leaned back in his crystalline throne, processing this information with the cold calculation that had kept him in power for over 3,000 years. The Draconian Empire had faced many threats throughout its history: alien invasions, internal power struggles, resource shortages, technological challenges. But this was something entirely new, a crisis of purpose that struck at the very foundation of their civilization. What is the current status of the Earth situation? He asked. Commander Zeth Kalar has established what he terms a protectorate agreement with the human governments, Thexnalar replied with barely concealed disgust. He has used imperial medical technology to cure several thousand human diseases, provided them with basic space travel capabilities, and begun training programs for technological integration. They are cooperative. More than cooperative. They appear to be genuinely grateful for the assistance and eager to contribute to what Zeth Kalar calls a mutual advancement partnership. The Emperor was silent for several minutes, his ancient mind calculating possibilities and consequences. Around him, the council waited nervously for his decision. These were beings who had conquered star systems without hesitation, who had ordered the extinction of entire species with casual indifference. But the concept of voluntary cooperation with lesser beings was so foreign to their experience that they literally did not know how to process it. "Show me the human child," the Emperor commanded. A holographic display activated in the center of the council chamber, showing Sarah Chen in real time aboard Zeth Kalar's ship. She was in the observation lounge looking out at the stars with wonder while Dr. Kethmoros explained the basics of hyperspace navigation. Her transformation was visible even to untrained eyes. She moved with confidence and grace that spoke of enhanced physical capabilities, and her eyes held an intelligence that seemed to process information at superhuman speeds. But what struck the Emperor most forcefully was not her physical improvements, but her interaction with the draconian medical officer. There was no fear in her demeanor, no subservience or intimidation. Instead, she asked questions with genuine curiosity, offered observations that made Dr. Kethmoros pause thoughtfully, and occasionally laughed at something that amused her. It was the kind of easy, natural interaction between equals that no draconian had experienced with another species in living memory. "She appears to be adapting well to her enhancements," observed Counselor Velfara, the Empire's chief genetic specialist. "But I don't understand why Commander Zeth Kalar considers her transformation to be significant. We have enhanced subject species before." "Have we enhanced them for their benefit rather than ours?" the Emperor asked quietly. The question created an uncomfortable silence. In 10,000 years of expansion, the Empire had never used their technology to improve another species without expecting something in return. Enhancement was always a precursor to exploitation, a way to make subject populations more useful for imperial purposes. "No, Your Majesty," Counselor Velthara admitted. "We have not." Emperor Methgalar continued studying the holographic display, watching as Sarah pointed to something outside the observation port that made Dr. Kethmoros follow her gaze with interest. The interaction was so natural, so free of the power dynamics that characterized all imperial relationships, that it seemed almost alien. "Computer," the Emperor commanded, "analyze the psychological profiles of all crew members aboard Commander Zethkalar's vessel." Data streams flowed across the display as the Imperial monitoring systems analyzed the biosignatures and behavioral patterns of every Draconian on the ship. The results were startling. Stress levels were at historical lows, productivity indices had increased by 40%, and psychological cohesion ratings were higher than any fleet had achieved in centuries. "They are happy," Counselor Velterra said with amazement. "The crew is actually experiencing psychological satisfaction from their current assignment." "Impossible," Grand Admiral Thexanalar protested. "Draconians do not experience happiness from non-conquest activities. It was bred out of our psychology specifically to prevent this kind of emotional instability." But even as he spoke, the data streams continued displaying evidence that contradicted everything they thought they knew about their own species. The crew of the Eternal Dominion was not just functional, they were thriving. They were engaged with their work in ways that went beyond duty or loyalty. They were finding meaning and purpose in protection rather than destruction. Emperor Methkalar leaned forward in his throne, his ancient mind grappling with implications that stretched far beyond one rebellious commander and one enhanced human child. "Counselor Velthara, what would be the consequences of reversing our genetic modifications, of allowing our people to experience the full range of emotional responses that we eliminated? Your Majesty, such a reversal would be catastrophic. Our entire social structure is based on logical hierarchy and efficient resource allocation. If our people began experiencing emotional attachments, forming personal bonds, questioning orders based on moral considerations, the Empire would collapse," Thexanol finished grimly. "Or," the Emperor said slowly, "it would evolve." Evolution was not a concept that the Draconian Empire readily embraced. They had achieved perfection through conquest, dominance through genetic manipulation, order through the elimination of unpredictable variables. The idea that they might need to change, to grow, to become something other than what they had been for 10 millennia was almost incomprehensible. But the evidence was undeniable. One ship, operating under principles of cooperation rather than domination, was outperforming the rest of their fleet by every measurable standard. One commander, acting out of compassion rather than conquest, had achieved something that brute force had never accomplished: genuine cooperation with another species. "Show me more of the human integration data," the Emperor commanded. The display shifted to show technical readouts from Earth's various research facilities. In the weeks since Zethkalar had established his protectorate, human scientists working with draconian technology had made breakthrough advances in multiple fields. Their approach to problem solving was completely different from draconian methodology, more intuitive, more creative, more willing to explore seemingly illogical possibilities, and the results spoke for themselves. Fusion reactors operating at efficiency levels that exceeded imperial standards, medical techniques that combined draconian precision with human innovation to achieve outcomes neither species could accomplish alone. Agricultural systems that increased food production while actually improving environmental conditions rather than depleting them. "They are not trying to become us," Counselor Velterra observed with wonder. "They are remaining themselves while integrating our capabilities. It's creating hybrid solutions that neither species could develop independently." Emperor Methkalar stood from his throne for the first time in decades, his ancient form moving with surprising grace despite the weight of centuries. He walked to the great crystal window that looked out over the Empire's capital city, where billions of Draconians lived their carefully ordered lives in service to galactic expansion. 10,000 years ago, he said quietly, our ancestors made a choice. They decided that emotional attachment made us weak, that compassion compromised our judgment, that love was a luxury we could not afford. They created a species of perfect predators, designed for conquest and incapable of doubt. He turned back to face his council, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that made even the Grand Admiral step backward. But perhaps, he continued, they were wrong. Perhaps what we thought was weakness was actually the source of true strength. Perhaps what we eliminated was not inefficiency, but the very thing that could have made our empire truly great. The implications of his words sent shockwaves through the council chamber. If the emperor was questioning the fundamental assumptions upon which their civilization was built, if he was considering reversing 10 millennia of genetic and social conditioning, then everything they knew about themselves and their purpose in the galaxy was about to change. Your Majesty, Grand Admiral Thexnaller said carefully, "What are you proposing?" Emperor Methkalar smiled, an expression so rare among their species that several council members actually gasped. "I am proposing an experiment, Grand Admiral. I am proposing that we allow Commander Zethkalar to continue his work with the humans, that we observe the results of cooperation rather than conquest, and that we begin the process of reversing our genetic modifications to see what our people might become if they were allowed to feel again."
And if the experiment fails?
If emotional attachment proves to be the weakness our ancestors believed it was? The Emperor looked once more at the holographic display, where Sarah Chen was now drawing pictures for Dr. Kethmoros while explaining some aspect of human art that seemed to fascinate the Draconian medical officer. The joy on both their faces was unmistakable, and the bond forming between them was unlike anything the Empire had seen in millennia. "Then we will have learned something valuable," he said simply. "But I believe we will discover that the greatest weakness in our empire is not the presence of love, but its absence." As his words echoed through the crystal chamber, Emperor Methkala made a decision that would reshape the galaxy. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation was about to begin, and it had all started with one small human girl who taught a dragon the meaning of compassion. 5 years had passed since the day Supreme Commander Zethkalar watched a 12-year-old girl suffer and die, only to resurrect both her life and his understanding of what it meant to be truly powerful. Now, as he stood on the observation deck of the new Dominion, no longer a flagship of conquest but a symbol of cooperation, he marveled at how completely the galaxy had transformed. The ship itself was a testament to the marriage of draconian engineering and human creativity. Its hull gleamed with the traditional crystalline armor of imperial vessels, but organic curves and flowing lines spoke of human aesthetic sensibilities integrated into its design. Gardens flourished in protected atmospheric bubbles along its exterior. a concept that would have been incomprehensible to the old empire but now served as both beauty and practical air purification systems. But the greatest change was not in the ship's design, it was in its crew. Draconians and humans worked side by side throughout the vessel, their different approaches to problem-solving creating innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. In the engineering sections, human intuition guided draconian precision to create fusion systems that operated at impossible efficiency levels. In the medical bays, draconian bioreconstruction technology was refined by human empathy to heal not just bodies, but psychological trauma that had been accumulable over lifetimes, and at the center of it all was Sarah Chen. Now 17 years old, she had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history, a bridge between species that transcended the boundaries of biology itself. The enhancements that Dr. Kethmoros had given her 5 years ago had continued to evolve, but not in ways that anyone had predicted. Instead of simply making her more like a draconian, they had allowed her to become more essentially human than ever before. Her intelligence had expanded to encompass multiple forms of reasoning, not just the logical progressions that draconians prized, but also the intuitive leaps and creative associations that made human minds so adaptable. Her physical capabilities had enhanced her natural human traits rather than replacing them, giving her the strength to protect others while maintaining the gentleness to comfort those in pain. Most remarkably, her capacity for empathy had grown to such a degree that she could literally feel the emotional states of both humans and draconians around her. This ability, which the old empire would have classified as a dangerous weakness, had become the foundation for unprecedented cooperation between the species. Zeth Kalar found her in the ship's central garden, a vast botanical preserve that served as both a recreational area and a living laboratory for studying planetary ecosystems. She was sitting beneath a tree that had been transplanted from Earth, its familiar green leaves providing shade for a conversation between a human scientist and a young draconian who was experiencing emotions for the first time. The genetic reversals had begun 3 years ago, initially as carefully controlled experiments on volunteer subjects. The process was irreversible. Once a draconian's emotional capabilities were restored, they could never return to the cold efficiency of their ancestors. But despite the risks, volunteers had come forward by the thousands, then millions, then entire fleets. The draconian sitting with Sarah was typical of the new generation. Hatched after the reversals began, he had never known the emotional emptiness that had defined his species for 10 millennia. His scales were the traditional deep green of his genetic line, but his eyes held a warmth that would have been impossible in the old empire. "I still don't understand why humans create art that makes them sad," he was saying to Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the human xenobiologist who had become one of the foremost experts on draconian human integration. "If beauty should bring joy, why do your poets write about loss and pain?" Sarah looked up from the tablet where she had been reviewing integration reports from across the galaxy, her enhanced senses picking up the genuine confusion in the young draconian's voice. "Because beauty isn't just about happiness, Kethanolar," she said gently. "It's about truth. And truth includes sadness and loss as well as joy and discovery." The young draconian, named after the doctor who had saved Sarah's life, turned to her with the respect that all the younger generation showed toward the human girl who had become their generation's greatest teacher. But why would anyone seek out painful truths? Why not focus only on pleasant experiences? Dr. Martinez smiled, recognizing a teachable moment. "Because when you avoid painful truths, you also limit your capacity for joy. If you've never experienced loss, you can't fully appreciate what you have. If you've never struggled, you can't understand the value of achievement." Sarah nodded, then stood and walked over to a memorial wall that had been installed at the center of the garden. The wall was covered with names, not of draconian war heroes or conquest victories, but of beings from dozens of species who had died during the Empire's expansion years. Each name represented a life that had been lost to the old philosophy of might making right. "This is why we remember," she said, placing her hand on the wall, "not because the pain makes us happy, but because it makes us careful. It reminds us that every choice we make affects other people, other lives, other possibilities. Unlike his elders, he had no personal guilt to process regarding the Empire's past actions, but he had been educated about the consequences of unlimited conquest. "My genetic memories include fragments from the old Empire," he said quietly. "Sometimes I dream about the civilizations we destroyed, and I wake up feeling heavy." "Is that what humans call sadness?" "Yes," Sarah said, putting a reassuring hand on his scaled shoulder. "And it's important that you feel it. That weight you carry is the foundation of wisdom. It's what will keep you from repeating the mistakes of the past." As they spoke, Zeth Collar approached through the garden paths, his massive form moving with the gentle precision he had developed over years of interacting with more fragile beings. At 50 feet away, Sarah's enhanced senses detected his approach, and she turned to greet him with the smile that had become one of the galaxy's most powerful diplomatic tools. "Commander," she said warmly, using the informal title that had replaced the rigid hierarchies of the old empire, "how did the council session go?" Zeth Kalar's expression was thoughtful as he settled onto a bench designed to accommodate his size. "The Andromedan Federation has agreed to the cooperation treaty," he reported. "They were initially suspicious of any agreement with former Imperial forces, but the testimonials from the Centauri colonies convinced them that our intentions are genuine." This was the new reality of galactic politics. Instead of expanding through conquest, the reformed empire was growing through invitation. Species that had once fled from draconian fleets now sought them out, hoping to benefit from the technological and social innovations that cooperation had produced. The Centauri colonies were a perfect example. A human settlement that had been established just outside the old imperial borders, they had initially prepared for invasion when draconian ships arrived in their system. Instead, they had been offered partnership. Draconian technology had solved their agricultural problems while human creativity had improved draconian recycling systems. The result was a thriving multi-species civilization that served as a model for integration throughout the galaxy. "What about the crystalline hives?" Sarah asked, referring to one of the species that the Empire had completely exterminated during its expansion phase. "Their genetic archives were more complete than we hoped," Zeth Kalar replied. "Doctor, the dragon watched a 1-2 year. Old girls suffer and die. 36 minutes afterward, events took a turn.